Hi, everyone. This is the Heartland Podcast. I'm David Steinman, your host, and today I'm with Mike Nichols, who is running for Congress in the 4th District, Louisiana. And this is probably one of the most important races today in the United States because he's running against Mike Johnson in the kind of primary, it's called a jungle primary. And whether you're two Republicans, Mike is a conservationist Republican. He's very different than Johnson. Are you a 4th or 5th generation rancher?
4th generation, my wife's 6th generation.
So there's 10 generations of ranching in Southwest Louisiana, and we'll get to know Mike in this podcast. But he's running against the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. So it's a very important race because it's a way of bringing sanity back to politics on both sides. And I think he has some really worthwhile concepts and ideas that are going to distinguish him in this jungle primary. Mike, welcome to the Heartland Podcast.
Thank you, David. Glad to talk to you again. It's always a pleasure.
How's the campaigning going?
Well, being this is my first campaign ever, it takes its toll on you. It's going full speed now. Be qualified for the race, which kind of, that gives it a new meaning, if you will. It's like, hey, this is real. You're running for Congress. I've been working at the grassroots level for about, 6 months now. And, we did a little fundraising and we're starting to put out some campaign ads, billboards, signs, a lot of grassroots on the ground approach, going from town to town, from city to city, meeting with the people on the ground and hearing their concerns directly, from the horse's mouth. What do we need to be working on in Congress? What are the voters' priorities? What are y'all most concerned about?
Mike, what is the number one issue that's motivating voters in the 4th District in Louisiana? This is the southwest portions of the state. What motivates voters? What is the number one issue?
Well, keep in mind, this district is huge. It's one of the largest districts in the state. It also covers northwest Louisiana. Actually, excluding Shreveport, it kind of horseshoes around Shreveport and comes back down in the central part of the state, back toward Alexandria. And then it actually goes all the way over to the east to Ville Platte, which is more in the central part of the state, So it's just an extremely huge district. But as I go from, place to place in the district and talk to people, one of our biggest concerns is how, the cost of living, how we're going to pay for everything, paying your bills, just buying groceries. Gas prices have come down some. That was a big issue. But just being able to afford your house note and pay your insurance and pay your bills, pay your utility bills. That's a common thread across, every place I've been in the district. We're worried about how much everything costs and, especially for our children and grandchildren, worried about being able to, them being able to have a home, to buy a house and live and pay their bills. So, you hear it talked about a lot in the media, you talk about affordability, but it's a real life issue here. Is, I actually go to, we have a lot of dollar stores like everywhere else. And I actually go visit the dollar stores and I talk to the people coming in, and just everyday people. And they say, look, we realize how much the prices have gone up. They're concerned about that, David.
So what do you tell them? What are some of the solutions? What do you see?
Well, I think, one of what we've worked on and talked about, working with people who are very knowledgeable, economists, for instance, about, we're $40 trillion in debt, David. And we've been talking about this for several years now. If you talk to the experts, like 40 cents on every tax dollar we take in goes just to the interest. And it goes to China and Japan, the UK. From what I understand, what I've been told, the insurance companies are dinging us on this too, on this. And I'm just getting up on the learning curve on that, but they're a big player in that too, in that interest. So that's 40% right there. And then another thing that, we're looking at right closely behind that is healthcare. How do you afford healthcare? Deductibles are skyrocketing, co-pays are doubling. People are concerned about being able to purchase their medicines, their medication, pharmaceutical price, cost, whatever you want to call it. But, if you combine those things and then, the healthcare, inflation that's on the interest we're paying on the national debt, the economists are saying that could be as much as 25% as far as contributing to the inflation. So without trying to make that too complicated, and break that down, another estimate, when you think about it and try to figure out what can you do, is fraud, waste, and abuse throughout the government. Maybe that's another 25%, David. We're not sure, but you start getting into some pretty serious numbers and how to address these concerns and, bring costs down or at least stabilize them and stop insurance somehow from taking up all of our disposable income.
I wonder if maybe it takes a rethinking. For example, in other parts of the country, in rural areas, communities form what are called co-ops, and they exert their buying power or they govern themselves, like for energy. They try to cut out the middle person for health insurance. Do ideas like that circulate? I mean, things are really expensive, and it seems like you're pointing out that that there are insurance companies that are taking with healthcare like 45 cents, 46 cents out of every dollar just for administration. Seems like there is a lot of bureaucracy, but what can you do to get rid of it?
Well, yeah, we have talked about using the co-op method, and that's from our background in rural areas. We have the agricultural co-ops. So we have a lot of experience with that, where we join the co-ops and it helps control cost. We're actually starting to study that idea closely and how you could implement it. One of the concerns on the implementation of it is all the government rules and regulations. Imagine that, right? But we're getting into the front end of that. How could we make this work? How could we come up with a plan that benefits, everybody, and we still have good health care coverage, but it's more affordable? And so the logic behind the co-op, of course, is like-minded people, and you have a board and you control the cost. And so that's I think it would be a starting point, if you will. We need to have a starting point to work from.
Why should people be dissatisfied with the current member of Congress?
Well, we think that we need strong leadership. I think that people are, they feel like we just keep on some of these issues, like the debt, we just continue to increase it. If you look into the estimates, I think some of it right now is maybe we've increased the debt this year, maybe 3 trillion is the prediction, some of the legislation that's been approved. So instead of getting a handle on it or stabilizing it, stopping it, slowing it down, it's like we're increasing it, and we're already, heavily in debt. And then with the healthcare part of it, we don't see a plan. We don't see a path forward with the current congressman. So, we want to come up with a plan. We want to present a plan and something that's workable for the American people. And we if you remember in the past, David, I've mentioned to you that here in Louisiana, we always we're recognized for being last in everything. But from a healthcare standpoint, we had a good system here. It was called the charity system, the charity hospital system. And you had volunteers, you had volunteer doctors, you had volunteer nurses. And we kind of, in our haste, we done away with was probably a good starting point for our whole country, where people that couldn't afford health care, could go get treated. They could get treated for all their illnesses. And it was just a good thing, it's the name of it implies that, the charity hospital. And I thought it was something we could build on. But in our haste, like we seem to do sometimes, we kill a good idea for, an idea that's not so credible or not so great.
It seems to me that was a populist idea from the 20s and 30s, and that when the first paved roads were coming to Louisiana too, and you had a very populist governor, Democrat, Huey Long, who made sure that all kids had school books. They didn't have to pay for them anymore. So, there are some ways where there's been a lot of progressive movement in the state too. There's a lot of, if you go towards the river parishes, there are some democratic strongholds or environmental strongholds. So one of the issues that you've been involved with has to do with moving from the economy, but not really moving from the economy, because what I want to talk about next, which is environmental health, is not really moving from the economy. It might actually be some of the ways that the local economies can improve. For example, I want to talk about carbon capture and sequestration, but I also want to talk about the local forestry industry. What about mills having more local lumber and factories that are taking advantage of the natural resources in your district? What are the major, also, along the river parishes, they grow sugarcane. What's the major agricultural crop in 4th District?
Yeah, it's forestry and it's timber production.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very just depressed right now. And we actually had a mill close at the beginning of the year. And one of our, I guess, what we're kind of concerned about is we have been targeted for, like you say, CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, which is storing carbon dioxide underground. So the oligarchs can enrich themselves even more. I'll explain that a little bit in a minute. But our forest economy seems like they've just turned a blind eye to us. And maybe we should have tried to keep that mill open. We fall over ourselves for this carbon capture and sequestration. And I'm talking about, our elected officials seem to not care about how much it costs to implement something that we don't think is going to solve any environmental problems anyways. But when you look at forestry, when you compare the two, forestry actually works. I mean, we capture carbon. It's part of the natural process. So, it's not some farce. It's real, and it gives people jobs. It puts people to work. And we should have tried our very dead level best to keep that mill open in North Louisiana, it's very important, that mill that closed, for the whole northwestern part of my district, because that's where they turn to sell their pulpwood. But
why did it close?
Well, the company just decided that it wasn't beneficial anymore, that it wasn't lucrative enough, if you will. Corporate companies do that, David. They don't bring into the fact that, hey, yeah, we're going to hurt a lot of people. 500 people lost their jobs immediately. Wow. And yeah, that's in a rural area, that's a lot of people. That's a lot. But we didn't do anything as far as our leaders to keep it open. And in my perspective, I'd have been fighting tooth and nail to keep it open. And what I mean by that, compared to the effort we're putting into this carbon capture and sequestration to capture carbon dioxide, which is not even an air pollutant, by the way, and we all agree on that. It's called a greenhouse gas by people who are concerned about the planet warming up. But if you look at that practically from a taxpayer standpoint, the money it's going to cost us as taxpayers is exorbitant. It's just outrageous how much it's going to cost the taxpayers, billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars to implement this. And industry is only responsible for about 20% of the CO2 emissions. So most of it comes from, our transportation sector, about 45% of the CO2. So the whole point being there, let's push forestry. Let's have subsidy. If we're going to have subsidies for, these big oligarchs and these big oil and gas companies, these big corporations, instead of spending that money on that kind of stuff, which is really not going to benefit us, our district economically, it's going to benefit those guys tremendously. But let's keep our mills open. Let's put those subsidies toward what we call pulpwood, which is the first thinning. And then we can have discussions about that. We're not against wood pellet plants. We're not hardcore against biomass production using wood, although there's some environmental issues there that definitely needs to be addressed. But the problem we have is when you want to start taking the ruse behind all that is these companies are not coming in here for that purpose. They're not legitimate. They're not coming for the wood product. They're coming to be able to pump CO2 in the ground and get the 45Q tax credit, Dave, which is $85 a ton right now. And by the way, trees are 4 times more efficient at capturing carbon, not carbon dioxide. They store carbon, and then we cut it into lumber and it's stored in people's homes. So the natural process is just way more efficient, David, than what these corporations are proposing.
How would you have voted in Congress on those tax credits for?
Well, we worked really hard, David. We had over 40 conservatives and we had bipartisan support across Congress to try to kill this, to try to kill the 45Q for the CCS, it's called, carbon capture and sequestration, which, like I say, it's not carbon, it's carbon dioxide. And for every 1 ton of carbon that a tree stores, you have to capture 4 tons of carbon dioxide. It's what's called carbon dioxide equivalence. So they don't want to talk about the science behind it, David. They don't want to talk about the technical criteria. They're saying, oh, this is a great thing and it's going to make us have more marketable products, our natural gas and all these things that we've been doing for years, Dave. We didn't pump CO2 in the ground, but all of a sudden now it's for our overseas customers to buy our natural gas or to buy our methanol for their ships, David. We've been making methanol since 1920. We didn't inject CO2 in the ground. So we're for the methanol plant, David. Like I say, we're for the industry, but they've put us between the proverbial rock and a hard spot by saying we're going to inject carbon dioxide, highly pressurized in what's called a supercritical state. And God only knows what the pressure front's going to be when they pump 100 million tons of this stuff in the ground. You're going to cause seismic activity. You could pollute the groundwater. Just discussions that should have been held up front, David, that they chose not to do. And by they, I mean our political leaders, and especially Congress. These things could have been addressed at the congressional level with those 40 people that I'm telling you about, including bipartisan support at the congressional level. They wanted to do this. They wanted to address these things in the big, beautiful bill, because we've been using carbon dioxide in what's called enhanced oil recovery. And no one's really fighting that. You use the carbon dioxide to push the oil up out of the ground when the pressure drops, in the oil play. So,
Sure.
we're aware of that, and you recapture the carbon dioxide and you reuse it. So, as long as you're doing what you're supposed to there, the risk with enhanced oil recovery doesn't even remotely compare to the risk associated with just pumping CO2 in the ground. And how's that produce a commodity for us? How's that going to benefit our communities? Nothing like increasing wood production. Wood production is a legitimate thing that we should be able to fund taxpayers. It creates jobs for all the rural people.
Now there's the need for wood goes up as home construction goes up. Now you're talking about this particular mill produced, you said, wood pulp?
Yeah, produce pulp wood for paper. You can use it to make pellets. The wood pellets that we're shipping to Europe that they're using to generate power. It's a big thing now. We have a couple, wood pellet plants.
Is there a lot of international competition? Like, is this plant, for example, in Louisiana, being undercut by competition from other countries?
No, they actually are turning to us, the European countries, because of our availability, because of our wood supply. And that's what's ironic about it is they're like, we're going to be green by using up all the United States forest. It's got some irony to it, David.
Right, but in fact, they're really not going to use up the forest. The whole point is that with intelligent management, forestry as a sustainable resource.
Sustainable. You
And
said the key
it
word,
seems
David.
to me like you need to tell voters, I'm going to work with Commerce Department and I'm going to get more European interest in buying wood pulp from Louisiana. And I'm going to work on the other economic side with Commerce to make sure that that plant has whatever the same tax breaks big oil would get.
That's correct. Sustainable, David, is the key word, like you said. Sustainable.
Where was Mike Johnson when it comes to all these carbon capture sequestration pipelines? Is he for them or against them?
Well, he's commented already in public that this CCS stuff, he's tied it to what he calls the matter of national security. And that is tied to the oil and gas industry, which is I mean,
let's be clear. There is no national security interest to pumping CO2 into into caverns near the Chico Aquifer, which supplies water for tens of thousands of people in your district. Let's just be really clear. Am I wrong on this? There is no national.
Yeah, the Chico Aquifer supplies almost 50% of the freshwater off a sole source aquifer, meaning that we don't have another readily available supply, feasible, practical supply of water. That's our only supply of water. And I live on the Chico Aquifer. It's below our feet. And it's a very valuable resource. Our Chico Aquifer is way more valuable than, these oil and gas companies wanting to pump CO2 in the ground. And that's just simple as that. They were like, no, we need to protect our groundwater. That should have been addressed up front, should have been addressed at the congressional level. We made those requests, David, to our congressional leaders, and we got totally disregarded. So what should have happened is you should have had an environmental impact statement addressing the Chico Aquifer like they did in Australia with their water supply. They did the same kind of situation they were in. They did an environmental impact statement, and they ruled out carbon capture and sequestration because of the risk to their groundwater in that area, David.
So in other words, Mike, cut to the chase, when it comes to carbon capture sequestration, from what I understand, a huge number of people in your district who own ranch lands like yourself, or have kids, or care about their home values, would be wanting someone to represent them who opposes all of these pipelines. And you are someone who opposes them. Whereas the person you're running against, Mike Johnson, the House Majority Leader, wants them to come in and will use a BS reason like national security to make people think that this is really for the country. So that's the stark difference, isn't it, between you and him on this issue?
Yes, that's definitely one of the stark, contrasts right there. But keep in mind, Dave, we're for the natural gas. We support that. It's just when you get into the CO2, you introduce a whole new set of risk. It's stuff it's not necessary. If you look at the research, if you look at the science behind it, the people who've studied this for years, even the economists, there's a study published out of Oxford that says it's a dead end road. And it makes sense when you think about it and use common sense, David. What you going to do when you fill up the holes, the pore spaces in 10 years? It's going to crash. They're not here for the long duration. They're not here to make our communities better. They're here to make money as quick as they can, these companies, these corporate companies, and bail out on us. They're not here to make wood pellets for 50 years, 100 years for our children and grandchildren. They're here to get those 45Q tax credits and bail out on us. Because something interesting that I want to let everybody know, because people saying, well, on one hand, Mike, you're arguing against industry. No, we're not arguing against industry. We made that very clear from the start. The company that tried to come into my home parish, Vernon Parish, to make the wood pellets, they want to inject CO2, which they do not even do in Arkansas at their home base, where they produce the wood pellets. They want to expand their operation into Louisiana, and we're all for that. But they don't even inject CO2 in Arkansas. You know why? because they know they're not going to get away with it with those people up there, those in the communities around their wood pellet plant. So they said, well, we'll go to Louisiana and inject it, which seems to be the common theme with all this. Hey, everybody, we can go to Louisiana and inject our CO2. And it's just, and get all those 45Q tax credits and rip our great grandchildren off, David. Put them, like I say, trillions of dollars in debt.
Well, yeah, and you say really what I think the issue is in many ways is it's not the industry itself, it's the state and big oil combining together to abuse the process of eminent domain and take people's land to put in those pipelines when it's not really for the people, it's just for big oil and the cronies who get their money by lobbying for big oil, but it's not benefiting most of the people in Louisiana.
No, there's very few jobs associated with that whole system. The only jobs you're going to have is the pipeline jobs, where you have pipelines being built for maybe a year or year and a half. And then, you might have one or two jobs associated with that, injecting the carbon dioxide in the ground. So I mean, it's not a whole lot of jobs. We've already vetted that and we've called them out on that. What jobs are you talking about? My first job out of high school, David, was a welder's helper on pipeline in New Iberia, Louisiana. So I've got 3 natural gas pipelines that cross my property. So to suggest that we're anti-natural gas or anti-oil is foolish. I mean, it's just total foolishness. Part of my district down in Southwest Louisiana is industry. I mean, it's all the refineries, it's the chemical plants down around Sulphur. So, that's something that we have to talk about. I mean, let's keep the industrial processes in the industrial places by the plants in the yards. Let's not distribute it all across hundreds of thousands of acres of rural property where we're already capturing carbon, David. We've been doing it. Our great grandparents was capturing carbon by growing forest, by managing the soils. I mean, all those things we've been doing. Now here we are. Ironically, we're the brunt of, let's go inject our CO2 out there where these people's already been doing it for all these years. Let's run them off the land. So in 10 years, we'll definitely be, this whole process, David, is going to result in more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than we have right now. And if you think about it just for a second to get people to slow down, well, how can that be, Mike? They're pumping in the ground. Well, they're going to fill the pore spaces up, David. Well, then the plan is to double our exports of liquefied natural gas to Europe. So their utility prices can come down 15% and ours will go up 30%, David. Now, how ludicrous is that kind of thinking? When you start just really thinking about what's going on here, we're just not, this is crazy. The whole thought process is crazy. We need, what we say out in the cattle lands, those saying we need to lick the calf. Where that old cow, she'll just keep on licking that newborn calf until she gets it clean. So we got a lot of cleaning up to do, David. We really do. We got to just go back to the drawing board and say, does any of this really make sense for the taxpayers? And the conclusion will be with any practical person, even if you're a climate fanatic and you believe in that climate change is going to happen in 10 years or 20 years, whatever you may believe. If you look at it from a taxpayer standpoint, this is not a solution. It's not solving anything. It's just a waste of tax money. So if we're going to go down that path, let's use natural projects. Let's plant trees. Let's manage the soils, renewable projects, from nature. Let's restore our coastal wet. All the money we're going to spend on this stuff, we could restore our coastal marshes in Louisiana. I mean, we could actually pump sediments with a dredge boat and build marsh back. It's a very expensive process to do that, but it's not nearly expensive as wasting all our tax dollars on this CCS stuff, David.
You're saying those marshes would store that carbon dioxide too?
They would store carbon. I mean, they would pull the carbon dioxide out of the air, just the way the good Lord intended it, and it would store it as carbon in the plants, in the soils. Wetlands are some of the most productive carbon storage areas, any type of habitat. Our coastal marshes, we've restored. When I was working with in conservation, restoring coastal projects on the coast of Louisiana, which I recently retired after 40 years, but we restored 125,000 acres, David, of productive emergent vegetation, coastal marshes. You just wouldn't believe the amount of carbon that stores in these forests that we're talking about. The amount of carbon that's stored in a natural forest is unreal. They take the carbon dioxide out of the air, wetlands and forest, and store carbon, and they give us oxygen so we can breathe. But now we have a bunch of, I don't know, I hate to be ugly, but a bunch of shysters. They're scamming us, David. They're like, hey, we can do better. And they will make those arguments standing up at a podium, David, that we can do better than nature. No, you can't. I've been in this my whole life. We cannot outperform nature, David. We cannot do it.
Mike, what percentage of the district, the 4th district, is against these carbon capture sequestration wells?
We've done polls, David, and it's been as high as 90% of the people.
So this is the issue. I'm going to wrap up this Heartland podcast for this issue, for this night. But so folks in the 4th district, they should look for Mike Nichols on the ballot on May 16th when they vote. And that's because if you want to stop carbon capture sequestration, this scheme, the man to vote for, the right Mike, is Mike Nichols. The wrong Mike is Mike Johnson, because he is totally for carbon capture sequestration. And he's lying to people. And I want to be really clear. This is not about national security. It's about national insecurity. So this is David Steinman. This is the Heartland Podcast. We've been talking to Mike Nichols of Vernon Parish, Louisiana, who's running against Mike Johnson for the 4th District House seat. Please pay attention. We'll have Mike on again real soon to talk about other issues. And we look forward to talking to you a little bit more then. Again, if you've been here for this long, please do subscribe. Please visit. Mike, what's your website?
We got Mike Nichols for Congress on Facebook, and we got MikeNicholsForCongress.com is my website.
Please visit the websites and give him your support. He is a conservationist Republican, and we need more folks who understand nature and care about environmental health. You can find my new book, Raising Healthy Kids, Protecting Your Children, at Amazon.com. You can use the link in this post. You can subscribe to my YouTube podcast at David Steinman _often. Talk to you soon.